Did the CDC just compare cruise ships to Wuhan, China?
Oh, yes, they did.
We'll give you all of the information in this video up ahead. Hi there, I'm Ilana, and this is my husband, Frank. We are from the website lifewellcruise.com, and today we are going to be talking about the possibility, will we be able to cruise again in 2020? Now, you may already know that the CDC has extended that no sail order until September 30th, 2020, but there is more. So what we are going to do is a couple of things. Firstly, we are going to be going through that document. It is 20 pages long, that document. You can see the highlighted portions. We spent 2 hours going through it, and being completely honest, it is a little bit critical of the cruise lines. But as well, we're also going to be talking about what it will take for cruises to resume in 2020. I'd love to know what you think. Before I get started though on that information and we go through that, I did want to mention, if you do like this video, if you find it helpful or informational in any way, please do give it a thumbs up. We really do appreciate it. And of course, please consider subscribing to our channel. So let's get started with that information from the CDC and more. So if it feels like you've heard all of this information before, it might be because CLIA, the Cruise Line Association, had actually made an announcement not very long ago that they were suspending cruises voluntarily up until September 15th. And then not long after that, Carnival Cruises announced that they were suspending their cruises up until September 30th. So really right in line with this CDC announcement. But what we are going to do now is go through basically 6 main points that Frank and I went through this morning in this document, and we really kind of hashed those out together, and we came to the conclusion that this document was really quite critical of the cruise lines. At the same time, though, I know that we had been wondering, what is the CDC doing? And what have they been doing to help the cruise lines or to communicate with the cruise lines about getting back to cruising? And so this document does point out a lot of things, and we did find it actually quite interesting, but it was definitely quite critical of the cruise lines. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through that information now. So the first point is they basically point out the data, and they start with saying that obviously coronavirus is a major problem. They also point out the amount of time that they have spent with the cruise industry on this. They say that they've spent 38,000 person hours on this. Other government agencies have as well. And they point out that they've regularly been in contact with cruise lines, which I guess is good news. And they say by email and by phone. Then they point out the data. They say between March 1st and July 10th, 2020, that they've actually counted 2,973 cases of coronavirus on their illnesses on the cruise ships, and actually 34 deaths. And they do point out that they had 123 ships sailing during this entire time within the U.S. jurisdiction. And they have 99 out of the 123 cruise ships that have had outbreaks.
So now if we go over this data, I mean, if we talk about 2,973 cases, I would consider that relatively low, don't you think?
In a way, yeah. Like, it did surprise me. Not that, I mean, obviously 3,000 people almost is significant. It's, yeah. Because anybody being ill is something important, and 34 people to have died, whether they were crew or passenger.
It's a terrible thing. I mean, obviously, you know, we don't want to downplay that, but in the scheme of things, like overall, if you think about it, it's I still think it's relatively low. It
seems to me, especially when we're looking at 123 ships were sailing, with probably, would you average 4,000 to 5,000 people per ship? Because we're including crew now. Yeah. So it doesn't seem as high as I would have maybe thought, especially because at the beginning, no one knew there were these problems, right? Exactly. Those first sailings.
And also, like, you know, like the cruise industry got a really bad rap from the beginning, right? So they did. They did. Yeah.
They also, though, did point out that they actually have 9 ships. This really surprised me, that they have 9 ships that still have ongoing or resolving cases of COVID-19.
To this day.
To this day. That was completely, I will say it was a shock to me. I did not realize that that was still happening.
Yeah.
So that is something important. That might mean that they've had some cases within the last 28 days. It doesn't mean that anybody is actually dealing with it in a significant, serious way right now, but they probably have had within the last 28 days some amount. Yes, absolutely. And they basically are highlighting within this report the challenges that they've been facing with the cruise line, is what they say. Now, if you hear birds, we are in our backyard, so please bear with us. The second point that they point out is actually the very serious cases of coronavirus on the ships, the Diamond Princess and as well the Grand Princess, where they had outbreaks. And those were, of course, very serious. And they do point out that there was an increased risk of transmission on these cruises. They do say that even though CLIA issued a voluntary pause in cruising on March 13th, there were outbreaks after this. And
well, that's mainly because, right, the cruises continued after March 13th, right? The ones that were already on the water.
That I do have to wonder, I have to say. I do wonder about that as well. And at the time I wondered as well, the cruise lines did have their voluntary pause in cruising on March 13th. Yeah. But if a cruise would have left on March 12th, they were allowed to continue that sailing.
Instead of calling them back to port, they continued their 7 or 10 or 15-day cruise.
Exactly. And there were a lot of issues after that where some cruises weren't even able to get back into port. And obviously, I do think if cruise lines could do it again, I'm imagining in hindsight, they would have done things a little bit differently. But CLIA does point out that between March 14th and mid-April, that they had 6 cruises at least that were involved in COVID-19 related outbreaks. So this seems to be what they are talking about.
Right, CDC, right?
The CDC.
Yeah, okay.
The third thing that they point out is what happened since April 15th. So that's when they issued another no sail order, and that was for 100 days. And at that point, basically, what the CDC asked for was to have a response plan for getting the crew home. And it was quite arduous. So there were things like, it was basically, they point out that this was to minimize the impact on U.S. jurisdictions on the resources, the health resources in the communities, which actually I think does make sense, but they do admit it was arduous. So they say they needed chartered flights to send crew home. There was a cost burden for cruise lines, and some destinations actually have restrictions, and even they were not even taking their own citizens in. And this continues to be difficult for the cruise lines to repatriate all of their crew.
To this day again, right? It's an ongoing problem.
It is. And they really have, I mean, they've gotten most of their crew home, but there are still some crew that are on board cruise ships, and a good part of that now is because their countries where they live are perhaps not accepting people back into the country right now. So it's definitely difficult. The fourth thing that the CDC talked about is the response plans that they had asked for from the cruise lines. They say that those came in incomplete. Now, they do say that they actually have a small staff of 2 people for every submission that comes in from the cruise line to go over that and to give feedback back to the cruise line. So that seems to be going a little bit better now, but they say that some of the things that were issues were that the information that they had requested just wasn't there in those initial plans. Now, well, perhaps it's not surprising, but kudos to them, is that the only cruise line that seems to have gotten that plan right as of now is actually the Bahamas Paradise cruise line. And so they apparently have pretty much a perfect plan. But all of the other cruise lines, well, CDC is still waiting for the cruise lines to submit things with all of the details that they want to see so that they can approve it. Now, they do say also that they have some issues, and these seem to be right now while the crew are on board. So some of the issues that they have is that the cruise lines have not canceled social gatherings while on board, the gym, the crew bars, that kind of thing. This seems really quite important. They have asked the CDC that all of the crew on board would have their own cabin and their own washroom, their own private washroom. And apparently this did not happen on all the cruise lines. So the CDC had heard of that and had actually asked the cruise lines to rectify that. And that wasn't all of the cruise lines. They did make some specific, they did point out some specific issues with some of the cruise lines. But there does seem to be that the CDC did communicate with the cruise lines about these things. Other issues are discrepancies in reporting, not limiting the self-serve buffet. So these are all things that I would have thought the cruise lines would have actually rectified.
Yeah, and that comes to a surprise that, you know, I would think that, you know, it seems simple enough, like, you know, like that they're still having issues with self-serve buffet. I mean, I thought that was the obvious, you know, an obvious thing, and it seems to me it should be easy enough to stop, but they're continuing to do that. Or even like not having enough cabins for each crew member with their own bathroom. Like you know, these are big ships. How can they not have that available to their crew?
That's it. And we know that some cruise lines did that early on. They had given even their crew like all a balcony cabin, and I'm sure it wasn't easy, but it seems like the CDC is really pointing out these things and saying the cruise lines haven't been complying with everything the CDC is asking.
Yeah, but I guess just getting back to the Bahamas Paradise, I mean, just because you had mentioned that, I mean, I guess, you know, it's a smaller cruise line. They probably just go from the Florida to the Bahamas. It was probably easier, I would imagine, for them. And I think we had mentioned that earlier when we were discussing that, you know, like if they, you know, like for example, like a gym, because you're 2 days on a cruise ship, you know, it's easy for them to shut down a gym, right?
That is a good point.
You know, it's easy for them to shut down certain activities, whatever, because, you know, I guess the time spent is very minimal compared to a 7 or 10-day cruise.
Absolutely. And to be fair, also, like, even when I'm thinking about the crew, to limit all social gatherings. I mean, the poor crew, some of them who haven't been able to get home, and I think a lot are home now, but not everybody. But for people that were living on that ship for, I mean, those 100 days, while there were no passengers on board, and they may not even have a job, really, I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been for them.
It must have been very difficult, very difficult.
So to limit, like, to ask them to social distance, and, you know, they don't have their families that they're living with, right? So I think that must have been really, really difficult.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I know when you have a government body or when you have any governing body, even in your own business, you really have to listen. Yeah. So I mean, if, you know, the CDC are recommending things, they have to comply. It gives us an idea, obviously, and I'm sure there are two sides to this. But again, read the document. I'm going to leave it in. I'm going to leave it in the description below. We really went through this because we want to save you the boredom of those 20 pages. But this is the gist of it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go on to point number 5. Number 5. Now, if you love cruising, you are not going to like this, because basically what they're saying is that cruise travel is inherently sort of unsafe, and sort of the transmission of illness because of the densely populated environment, it is more likely to spread. Now, of course, we are talking about cruise ships of the past, but they don't really point that out. But what they do point out, and this is a hard one to believe, but they say that on the Diamond Princess, that the reproductivity levels of this virus were 4 times the levels of Wuhan, China. Yes, where this virus started. That the Diamond Princess was worse than Wuhan, China. I, again, will leave this document in the description below.
I feel like I should put out a laugh track or something. Because, now, I don't know, something just seems really off for that. But, you know, there was a lot of talk also about, you know, like a lot of information coming out of China was not accurate, or it might not have been what, you know, right. So I don't know, because I think the China statistic was really low or something, no?
I'm not even sure about the actual statistics, but I do know that different organizations have said that they do wonder about the way China was reporting, and I don't want to kind of get into the politics of it or anything like that.
No.
But it does seem unbelievable that the Diamond Princess, which in fairness, it was the first time anybody dealt with this virus, even though they weren't in North America, they were dealing with it with really the government of Japan dealing with it. But it seems hard to believe that the epicenter of this virus was
something just
was 4 times less bad than the Diamond Princess. Something doesn't make sense. Maybe I read this wrong, but I'm going to leave it below. Let me know what you think. If it's going to drive you crazy, let me know.
Maybe it's a typo
in the comments
in the
below.
report.
Maybe it's the opposite. Number 6. So the last point that they bring up, and I have to say they have a point about it, is they say that there seems to be a lack of consensus among the cruise lines or within the cruise industry. And they point out that different cruise lines have given information, whether through social media or whether directly in print, to their passengers about what things are going to look like for healthy sailing in the future. They point out that Royal Caribbean Group and Norwegian Cruise Line are putting together their Healthy Sail panel with numerous experts to really look into how to cruise safely in the future. Now, this is an open source panel, so it's really open to everybody to get that information, but it isn't all of the cruise lines together. And not to leave Carnival out, Carnival is actually having a summit. It's on July 28th. So if you're watching this now and it's before July 28th, do look on Carnival's website for the summit and see if you can find that to sign up. It's free, it's open for everybody. So they are doing different things, but they do point out that they would like to see some leadership and maybe some best practices that all the cruise lines can follow. So I guess that what they're saying is that they would like CLIA to actually do that. And I'm not really sure why CLIA hasn't, but kind of a good point, I guess. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Would you have liked to see, or would you still like to see CLIA take a larger role in this? So given all of this information from the CDC, is it even possible that we might cruise again in 2020, like sometime after October 1st?
Well, I don't know. I hope that the CDC is right on this one. You know, I mean, if that's what the CDC is saying, I mean, that'd be great. But my gut feeling is, you know, given that there's about 75 days left till October 1st, to me it seems a little too soon. I think that the cruise line have a lot to put into place, a lot of systems to put into place, and to me it seems too soon.
Absolutely. And at the same time, I think if we're looking at the current environment, I couldn't even imagine cruising right now. And of course, in a couple of months, it may look very different. We don't have a crystal ball. Things may have really improved with the health of our communities and our embarkation ports, and as well, perhaps even we might have a vaccine. I'm super hopeful for that, or better therapeutics. So all of that could look very different. But
right.
Well, we also know that when cruise ships will restart, something that they have said is that it will take about 30 to 40 days for crew to get back to the cruise ships for them to restart again. So that's not too bad. But they have told us that they are not going to be starting like every cruise ship all at once. So they will have a slow start at the beginning. So if it does restart after October 1st sometime, whether it's October 1st, November 1st, December 1st, it will not be every cruise ship starting at once. So a
gradual start, and I guess it makes sense, you know, that it would start that way.
It does, and I guess we have to wait to hear more from the cruise lines, and we have to wait, I guess, to just know that the environment is a little bit safer for us to be able to think about cruising and traveling. So what do we think? Are we cruising in 2020? If we had to, let's see. And you let me know what you think in the comments below. Are we cruising in 2020?
I'll say yes. I'll say yes because it's wishful thinking.
I'll say I hope, but I actually think that we'll start in January 2021. Let me know what you think. Now, thank you very much for watching. If you did like this video, if you found any of the information helpful, please do give it a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. And of course, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, I am on Instagram and I am on Facebook at LifeWell Cruise, and I'd love to connect with you there. Thanks again for watching, and happy future cruising.